attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the March installment of our VSA webinar series. I'm Sarah Mitchell, your webinar moderator. Today's webinar is called Poetry in Motion, a poetry dance play for the middle school special education classroom, and is part of a monthly series that comes out of the Office of VSA and Accessibility at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. This series addresses topics related to the arts, disability, and education. If you would like to view the live stream captioning of this webinar, you can follow the link you see in this slide and in the chat box of the control panel located on the right side of your screen. Before we get started, let's make sure you are familiar with the GoToWebinar control panel. This control panel can be hidden by clicking on the orange arrow in its top left corner. If you need to leave the webinar early, you can exit out of the program by clicking on the X in the upper right corner. A recording of this webinar will be available afterwards so that you can catch up on any parts you miss. Make sure you have selected either telephone or mic and speakers to correspond with how you are connecting to the webinar. If you are calling in from your telephone, please make sure you mute your computer speakers. You have the ability to submit or answer questions using the chat pane located near the bottom of the control panel. If you prefer to say the question aloud instead of typing it, please click on the raise your hand icon in the control panel, and I will unmute your microphone during the questions portion towards the end of the webinar. Otherwise, your questions will come directly to me. During the designated question and answer time at the end of the presentation, I will relay them to the presenter. Within the week, we will send out a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's presentation, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, a handout for your reference, and a copy of the webinar transcript. This means you do not need to scribble down notes during the presentation. Instead, you can go back to watch the recording and review the supplemental materials at a later date. I invite you to join us next month for Promote Dignity, Retain Integrity, Strategies for the Inclusive Secondary General Music Classroom on Tuesday, April 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you haven't already, you can register for it right now by clicking on the link in the chat pane. If you are active on social media, I invite you to connect with us using hashtag VSAWebinar. On Facebook, we are VSA International, and on Twitter, we are at VSAINTL. My colleague Courtney will be live tweeting during this webinar, so if you are active on Twitter, please say hi to her over there. She would love to engage with you. And with that, I will turn it over to today's presenters. Jenny and Noel, take it away.
Hi everyone, this is Jenny. Many years ago, I was invited to teach a summer dance course for children in a remote rural village in South America. On the very first day, the local school teacher came into the class holding his 8- and 10-year-old daughters by the hand. "We don't like dance," he announced, and then led them and all of the rest of the children out of the room. I had always relied on the power of dance and my teaching to engage resistant students and skeptical communities, and had successfully won them over in the past, but I had met my match and scrambled to figure out what to do. Poetry was part of the answer, but the greater part was collaboration and the discovery of a completely different way of reaching these children that I will reveal later in the webinar. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Noel Muradwij, a young poet and master's degree candidate in psychology from Beirut, Lebanon. Noel will be the voice of many poets in today's webinar.
Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny, it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else ever cared.
During the 1960s, educational reform movements changed how we view different stages of adolescent learning. Junior high school began to be called middle school. Middle school educators understood that the biological event of puberty alters the cognitive, social, and emotional lives of young teens. They saw the need for special accommodations in middle school, including mentor relationships between teacher and student, small communities of learners, and a flexible interdisciplinary curriculum that encourages active and personalized learning. These are our roses. Middle school students, by definition, already present great diversity of learning and reasons to integrate powerful teaching strategies in the form of poetry and dance lessons. So how do you teach an art form that's not my discipline, that's not your discipline? And specifically, how do we integrate poetry and dance? How do they complement each other? What are some strategies, instructions, and ideas for putting together a dance play? What poems to use? What are some poems to write and how to introduce this? And what are some dance strategies for the special education classroom? At the end of this webinar, we will ask you to consider your own next steps for expanding your practice using multiple arts. Every special education class and each individual student presents perceived or real barriers to learning. So I want this to be a little interactive right now, and for you to take a few seconds to think about barriers. Think about a perceived barrier. Think specifically about a wall. A wall is a barrier. If you're given a class and given a wall, what do you do? Do you write on a wall? Sing and act the wall? Paint the wall? Or dance the wall? Or a combination of several or all of those? These students danced the Great Wall of China, creating individual body poses and connecting hands to form a larger class sculpture. The best ideas, and this is a central theme to this webinar, the best ideas come from your students, but only if you provide the structure for multiple arts learning and discovery. And how do we do this? Collaborate. Use multiple arts, and let each student realize his or her full potential by engaging in the art form or forms in which they excel, can communicate, and can learn. Here is a member of the Merce Cunningham Dance Company performing Minutia against the backdrop of Rauschenberg's work of the same name. Cunningham, Rauschenberg, and John Cage often collaborated to create innovative works of art. But what if you don't have one of these geniuses? How do you teach an art form that's not in your discipline? Find one very important way is to collaborate with other artists and teachers. So perhaps you don't have somebody who's a poet accessible, but maybe there's a teacher who teaches poetry. The other important way is to provide material support, structure, and a safe and encouraging learning environment, and let your students respond. Back in South America, when I could not teach dance and was presented with that barrier, that obstacle, that wall, I introduced a poetry workshop, not something I had ever done before, though I had worked side by side with a colleague as she delivered poetry lessons and I delivered dance lessons. So I introduced it by just handing out paper and pens and asking the students to write about their village. Vladimir, a 13-year-old who had never written a poem, wrote, first in his language and then in the English translation. Mira a los caballos, como corren por la mañana. Mira a los caballos, cada día corren por la pradera. Son del viento y configuran al azul del cielo. Montar se siente como estar en las nubes. Estar con los caballos es estar como dos hombres, codo con codo, esperando la mañana. Look at the horses, how they run towards the morning. Look at the horses every day. They run across the meadow. They are the wind set against the blue sky. Riding feels like being in the clouds. Being with horses is to be as two men side by side, waiting for the morning. Well, I discovered not only Vladimir, but all of my students had a real connection to horseback riding. They felt free, powerful, and connected to their community, as most of them had grown up riding or going to work with their parents in the fields. For my part, I could barely stay on a horse. But an equestrian from a nearby hacienda, who usually ran tours on horseback for wealthy tourists, was thrilled to teach the local children and collaborate with me. I contributed a little horse choreography, and the children rode onto the grounds of the hacienda in a culminating event that brought aristocracy, farmers, and villagers together. In stepping outside of my arts discipline and connecting to what was really important to the students, we were able to create a powerful and sustaining educational experience. Find partners, as these two boys found each other. Find partners in professional colleagues. Find partners in your students. Find partners who can enhance, support, and illuminate your teaching. Provide opportunities for paraprofessionals, teachers, and volunteers to facilitate the individualized attention that your students deserve and need to really excel. Here, Maddie on the left works with Noah on a t-shirt design for the dance poetry play. Maddie is blind, and Noah draws her ideas. I want people to hear the sounds of pages flipping. Noah drew an open book of poetry. Maddie consistently reminds us that the audience may be blind, and she insists that we include audio description and other ways to make the performance accessible. Here's her drawing. Integrate times for your students to work with a partner and present their work to the group. So make sure there is this working time, but also let each dyad or group or individual perform what they've done, whatever shape that takes. Here the students are working on again on a t-shirt design, but they do the same when they're writing poetry. For Logan, here he is with his mother and another volunteer. We substituted dance practice because Logan found the drawing activity very distressing, and he began shouting and just, it was upsetting for him. But he loves rhythm and music, and he happily practices the dance steps, while other students have time to finish poetry and drawing projects.
Hi everyone, this is Noel. I'm really excited to be with you all today. I am a writer, and I discovered the power of poetry in my life when I was in middle school. Poetry breaks down barriers. It can shatter walls of stigma that exist in the special ed community. And stigma can come in many shades of not knowing how to act or what to say, and students continuously struggle with this, with finding ways to transmit their messages to their environment and to the people around them. Poetry, like dance, is part of a universal language. It can create a medium of honest and free expression. Often you will find your students will connect to an existing poem, or even better, create their own verse of poetry in ways that illuminate their experience to those around them in an incomparable way. As an educator, little is more satisfying than experiencing that moment of enlightenment. And today, I am very grateful to be able to represent the voice of poetry in this webinar.
James Berry is a Jamaican writer. His evocative poem, Taking Action, allowed the students to create their own choreography as well as respond to the choreography of the lead teacher. I want to show you just a little bit of how that went.
I dream I am high-flying duck's eyes over an ocean, washed in fire-splashed sunset. I dream we cross an open field and face a lion in our track. Making one group body, oddly, we come together.
The flying movement was created by students in dyads or groups of 3 or 4. Most of their ideas had them staying on the ground, more or less, to do their flying, but running across the floor, leaping across the floor. But one student figured out how to be airborne and directed his volunteers to lift him up and had a great time and wants to keep doing that step in everything that we do. The circle movement, part of it you're seeing on this slide, was also created by the students. And when, as you can well imagine, having an entire class of students with various needs and distractibilities, this took quite some time to bring together. But one of the students brought in her belt to show how the dancers could form a coil or one group body. She wrapped the belt into a circle and had everybody passed it around for everyone to feel, those of them who could not see. Poets who write about discrimination, courage, and resilience speak to students with disabilities. Using Maya Angelou's "And Still I Rise," students are given some steps and structure, but then are asked to interpret the emotion of the poem using their own way of moving. In special education with various barriers to movement and understanding, it's always important within the structure of an exercise to have freedom to access and express feelings in individual ways.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may tread me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise.
There are many ways to initiate a poetry writing session, asking the children themselves, the students themselves, to provide the poetry. We've included some resources with poetry prompts in a handout you'll receive after the webinar. Not all of your students will have the verbal or writing ability to complete a poem or even start a poem, but most can contribute in some way to a group poem or make their dance and movement their poetry. Some will emerge as leaders, encouraging others to write or to contribute. Here is 14-year-old Ryan's poem.
People you trust appear in your dreams. Things are not what they seem. You don't know where to turn, and all your thoughts are going to burn. Whether or not you choose to turn, darkness surrounds. A dream? Was it a dream? Or just a distant memory?
Stay present and in the moment. If it's raining, you can use rain as a prompt for poetry and movement. How does it feel? What does it taste like, look like, feel like? How does it make you feel? What can you do in the rain? Do you move fast or slow? What about jumping in puddles or dodging raindrops? When our accompanist introduced himself by saying, "I've been playing piano since the dawn of time," the curiosity of the students about what that meant, what does "since the dawn of time" mean, led to this poem by Samantha.
Since the dawn of time, people have danced. They have jumped, done ballet, run, and pranced. When I dance, I am filled with joy. Anyone can dance, girl or boy. It feels nice to perform. I take the stage by storm. People are excited when they watch me. When I dance, I feel free.
Some students have significant cognitive processing delays. Rehearsal and writing may be painstakingly slow. Extra time and support gives these students equal footing when it comes to learning, performing, and enjoying the experience. Our next poet always needs time to understand and execute each assignment, but she lights up the room when she beatboxes her performance.
Sometimes I can be a mime, but I don't have the time to rhyme, but I look like Optimus Prime. Snapped, whapped, babapped, bop your head to the music. Stop, bop, hip-hop, drop. Good morning, Daddy. Ain't you heard the boogie-woogie rumble of a dream deferred? Listen closely. You'll hear their feet beating out and beating out. You think it's a happy beat?
The work we do is hard. Our students' lives are hard, make no mistake. Finding poems and movement that speak to their struggle or your struggle makes a connection. Weaving poetry and dance together allows for an expansion of teaching and learning discoveries. Some of these students are quite advanced in their understanding and able to really grapple with abstract ideas. So the italicized, you think it's a happy beat, led to discussion and also a lot of contribution in terms of movement and ideas for how they can convey this poem. Love the Look of Words by Maya Angelou. It's a joyful poem with concrete imagery. Students can dance popcorn popping movement and move towards an understanding of metaphor and abstract ideas. So we can take popcorn leaps popping from the floor of a hot black skillet and into my mouth, and continue to work with the students to understand the metaphor that Angelou creates with words. I love the book and the look of words, the weight of ideas that popped into my mind. I love the tracks of new thinking in my mind. Working with students on the autism spectrum, we know that abstract concepts are difficult to grasp. When we combine words and movement, students can incrementally embody learning. Make each class and the performance, if you have one, very structured and planned. Begin with an icebreaker or a name game that includes movement. Sometimes you're teaching one class. Sometimes you're doing a residency and teaching 2, 3, 4, or 5 classes. Sometimes you have an entire year. But regardless of whether it's one time or you have the opportunity to be with your students throughout a year, start with an icebreaker and then continue with a routine that is familiar. Have a physical warm-up with repetitive movements that anchor the class and provide a clear beginning. Have a routine. Introduce a poetry idea and write the poetry in pairs or as a group. As a group, you can have each student contribute a word, a thought, a sentence, or a movement if words and sentences are not accessible to them. Observe the student writing when you do give them the opportunity to work in small groups. And see if somebody is restless, struggling, maybe allot 10 to 15 minutes for this period, but adjust it to your population. Read the poems or have the partners read the poems. Don't ever hesitate to give time to each individual to express and have the rest of the students in the class listen to them. Work on choreography based on the poem imagery. Again, that can come from the lead teacher or from the students themselves. I find them to be brilliant and more imaginative than I could ever be. Bring in a magic poetry box. Many of you have probably used this device, tactile objects that can evoke a verbal, written, or kinesthetic response in a magic box that they can go to as part of the routine or as a reward for focusing on the learning of the day. As we near the end of the Dance Poetry webinar, consider our outline for today and what might be your next steps in using poetry and dance in your classroom. How will you expand your practice? Thank you for joining us. We are ready for your questions and to delve more deeply into some of the curiosities of combining dance and movement into a wonderful artistic and educational experience.
Thank you, Jenny and Noel. Now, as they mentioned, we've reached the question and answer portion of our webinar. If you haven't already, now is the time to answer a question into the question box or raise your hand, and we'll get started. The first question that I have for you two is, you had some great examples of using different poems in your presentation, but do either of you have a favorite poem to work with?
This is Jenny. I'll answer first. Yes, the poems that I presented are my favorite. I have a favorite song that I work with when I'm doing swing dancing, and I'm thinking of the poetry in the same way. When I teach swing dancing, it's something that I adore. I always try and find something new, but come back time and time and time and time again to a song called Sing, 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 because it is so magnificent. Similarly, I come back to Langston Hughes as a poet in general, many of his works depending on the population. Langston Hughes is a poet that I was introduced to as a child by my parents, and so I come back to Dream Boogie is one, certainly the Maya Angelou that we presented in the webinar today, Still I Rise, is another poem that is an absolute favorite for working with kids. Then some of these were new. For example, the Taking Action poem by James Barrie. That's a poem and a poet I had never known before, and just doing this poetry with the kids was a great opportunity to discover somebody new and just find something that was really going to inspire movement. So definitely Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou. I'm going to let Noel speak. I may think of some others. Noel, favorite poets?
I don't really have a favorite poet. I think that would be unfair, but I do like a lot of contemporary spoken word artists out there who have done some beautiful works that I think can be put to dance in very powerful ways. I'm a big fan of Sarah Kay. There are a lot of poems that you can find on YouTube that address issues like bullying and some things that I think adolescents even specifically really have a hard time with. So I would lean towards those, and I personally watched Dr. Seaham work with Still I Rise, and I thought that the kids' response to that was just so inspiring. So that would definitely be one of my favorites.
That's great. The next question is coming from Tallery McCrae. It is, what are some of your favorite types of poetry for students who need more structure? For example, a structure that would allow a nonverbal student to choose between adjectives, nouns, etc.
Yes, well, thank you. That's a great question. In multiple learning and diverse learning, of course, we want to present in as many possible ways as we can. So I love bringing words in on cards with pictures of them, so people can, so kids who are nonverbal can even point and choose a word, and we can take off from there. I will say I had an experience of working with an entirely nonverbal, well, mostly nonverbal class, and brought in some pictures, some cards with pictures on them, because that had been very effective previously. And I found that as I wanted to introduce poetry to them, in fact, they were so responsive to the movement that I put the pictures aside. It was distracting, and used my own body to evoke some responses in movement from them, as responding verbally was really not accessible and not joyful in that moment. That's an example of where, if you have a limited amount of time, which I did with them, we only had 3 classes. Had I had the whole year, I certainly would have brought the pictures back, but I was really bringing in too many things. Well, here's some pictures, here's some words. So I think it's wonderful to play with having words written, but also having pictures of words, writing a group poem so that people can contribute with a word or a gesture that the teacher or other kids in the class can interpret, and then come away from those prompts and have other students who may be able to create sentences, create the sentence, so that there's really a group process involved.
Great, great. Now, is there anyone else who has a question for Jenny or Noel who has not asked one yet? Tyler says thank you, by the way.
Thank you. I mean, as maybe some people are thinking of questions, I want to say a word about spoken word poetry, because Noel is a wonderful spoken word poet, and I love, I just want to highlight what she said about that. I think it's a very powerful format, and we're talking specifically about middle school students. It's definitely, I've done that more in collaboration with other poets in terms of teaching the format, and yet those students are very, very responsive to rhythm and the rhythm and beat of spoken word format. So I do recommend that. I think that's a fantastic device, and also highly relatable because it's very present and current, and they may bring in their own favorite artists. That being said, some of the classic poetry is as accessible now as it was when it was written many, many years ago.
That's a great point. It sounds like there's a plethora of things that could be very relevant and be used in this context.
And Sarah, I have a question for the people who are there, if you don't have a question pending.
Sure.
So 2 questions. One is, when we asked you to think about a wall and what you might do with a wall, what did you think about, and what would you have done, or what's the first thing you would have done? And 2, what are your next steps? How might you think about poetry or think about dance if you are a poet, or if you're a writer, or if you're an educator who hasn't incorporated movement? Because we'd love to help you, or just hear what you're going to do next, and how you might expand what you've already been doing.
Oh, that's a great question. Now, if anyone wants to jump in, please just raise your hand in the box, and I will kind of unmute you so that you are able to speak. In the meantime, we do have a new question, and that is coming from Barry Kornhauser. The activities that you suggest seem great for all age groups. What is it that distinguishes this work from middle school students? Is the specific content of the poems or something else?
Hi, Barry. Thank you. Absolutely right. It is appropriate for all age groups. What I put up at the beginning, some distinctions with middle school as opposed to elementary school and high school. And of course, in working with, this is also a broad category, talking about special education, that's a big category. We can talk about children with autism, or middle school students, since we're talking about that, with autism, with various disabilities, various cognitive and emotional disabilities. So what I wanted to emphasize is that middle school in and of itself complicates the different abilities and the different challenges that our students are coping with, and to highlight that. So I think that all of these exercises are accessible to all students, and I wanted to raise awareness about the middle school students. I love this age. I think this age is sometimes ignored and falls through the cracks. So I wanted to emphasize it. I love the age because they are so responsive to creativity in general, of course, but very responsive to being given the opportunity to express their own individuality. All the kids are, but they are at a point where it's a little diffuse and confusing, and just even more so are responsive to us helping them and guiding them. So I don't know that, certainly the content of the poems is your judgment as middle school educators, if that's what you are, in terms of the appropriateness. But it's enjoyable for me. For example, I think maybe the high flying poem was more more elementary school level, whereas all of the poetry is appropriate for middle school. They are grappling with love and sex and relationships and intimacy, but also with bullying and differences on a more sophisticated but also a diffuse level. So I think they're appropriate for all people. I wanted to raise awareness and give a special place to the middle school student, because I think that they are sometimes not given the attention that is due.
Barry says thanks and bravo. In reference to the question that you asked the webinar participants, Deb Workman had an answer of paint the wall, and next step would be looking into how we can adapt the concepts to a group of students who all have been diagnosed with a profound disability.
Great. I'm sorry, who was that? Who answered that?
Deb Workman.
Deb. And Deb, I'd love to know Deb's discipline, or is she an administrator or a teacher?
Sure. Just a second. Oh, Deb, would you be comfortable coming on line and speaking with Jenny at all?
Sure, there's actually two of us here.
Oh, great.
Research as well.
Oh, well, hello, hello.
I'm sorry, Deb. Hi.
So,
Hey, Deb, and sorry, who's with you? And who are you?
So I'm Deb Workman, and I run a theater company that works with Jamie Richardson, who's here next to me, who works at Lifescape.
and I run an art program for kids and adults with disabilities. Most of them are profound.
Right. So what are your thoughts?
You know, initially we loved the concept, but how to break it down even more simple for the students that I support, because like we were talking about with a lot of those processing delays, you know, by the time our kids are processing some of the words, they're so far behind with their motion. So how we can make it even more simple and looking maybe just at words rather than a whole poem, but still using the same concept.
Yeah, beautiful. That's fantastic. I mean, I think what I got excited about, or I got excited about many things, but I think I was helping somebody who was bringing poetry to doing poetry work with a very severe, a population with quite severe disabilities, and she was a poet and very frustrated with, but had not really worked in special education very much, and had not worked with profound disabilities, and found, you know, she had all the enthusiasm and energy of an artist and a teacher eager to share her knowledge. And I think the hardest thing for her was to really see triumph and success and artistry in a word, in a step, and just find delight in that one gem. So pop is a poem, and pop and jump is a movement. So thank you. I love this question. I've done this work with very severe, and I am presenting kind of more sophisticated, or you know, certainly in the poetry, or saying that they're grasping all the ideas. But yeah, chicken is a word and a poem, and rain, for example, I think is one of the exercises that I did that might be really great for your population, and why, you know, breaking it down, being present and being in the moment and really speaking to an experience. We had just walked through the rain, And so they could really access and touch their own bodies to feel what that might feel like, and really relate, and then have very real life movements such as jumping in a puddle or stepping to get out of the puddle. So something like that, that's very evocative. And again, I think Rain, Stop, that's a beautiful poem. Rain, Go, fantastic poem. So, you know, it's hard to give the whole lesson, but that's why I think the questions are the most valuable thing. And what I mean by being present and in the moment and addressing your students' needs is, here's where they are. Can we talk about rain, or can we talk about wall, or can we talk about shirt, my blue shirt? But yeah, rain was one that I did, and I had a different prompt in mind, but because we had just gone through it, it was very, very, very present and current for them, and they all reacted to it. So I hope that's helpful, but I think that really what you're bringing up is how we see. I think the hardest things for teachers who've not worked with profoundly disabled is really seeing the artistry that I certainly do in Rain, Stop, in what they have created and how they see things. So, you know, I taught a population where the poetry was dance. They were not able to get to the verbal expression at all. And rather than that be a disappointment, frankly, the staff around them said, wow, they're mirroring each other, they are stretching their arms, they are laughing and jubilant about it. So yeah, hard to grapple with words. I also, I know I'm talking a lot, but I also, this question, and this is your population is one I work with quite a lot. And this year, frankly, and maybe why I'm emphasizing this or showing these examples, I said I really want to make sure that the students who are on the higher end of functioning get the attention that they deserve as well. So sometimes I know this has been for me. I want to make. I'm so concerned with making sure that somebody who has a severe disability is unlocked or is assisted in ways that they can best participate. And sometimes who gets left out are the ones on the other end. And I've made a very concentrated effort in the last few years to say I need to make sure that the ones who can function on their own but can function to the best of their ability, if they are supported and have attention of a partner, of myself, of an assistant teacher. So thank you. This is a great question, and love to, you know, talk more about that offline.
Wonderful, thank you.
Great, thank you all. Now we do have a couple more questions. Tallery has a practical question, which is, how do you navigate the physical space needed for movement? You work in traditional classrooms with desks. What do you, as the visiting artist, ask for in terms of type of space to be successful?
Great question, and this is a whole nother 12 webinars on working with systems. You know, you definitely want the art and the class, whether you're a teacher in the school or you're a visiting artist, which tends to be what I am. I'm usually a visiting artist or a teaching artist. You want to ask for, you know, preferably you're asking for a stage or an auditorium, and very often we don't get that. And actually sometimes I prefer to be in a classroom. I was in a school and we were offered the stage, and because that was not going to be consistent, because it might have been interrupted, as the school, as many do, was shared by more than one school, said no, we will work in the classroom. And what I asked is that the chairs be and the tables be moved to the periphery so that we could start the class in a circle with students at their desks. Then it's even part of the movement, you know, so that really allows for there to be movement for kids who can stand, or adults if that's who you're working with, but for participants to stand, to participate from their desk, but see each other, see the teacher, and for myself to be able to see each one of them. So ideally, we pull those desks and those chairs out to the periphery. Again, you know, you want to keep in mind what the time frame is and what and if that's impossible. But I was able to, you know, I generally am able to push desks somewhere. Sometimes an alternative when standing or, you know, is really not an option is to push the desks aside but just pull the chairs into the center, and that way you can really smush the desks into a corner. But I really like to create a circle if it's a large class so that I can see everyone and they can see me and they can see each other and respond to each other.
Great. I have one more question from Barry. He says that you talked about poetry evoking dance. Do you ever work the other way around with movement evoking poetry?
That's a great question. I have not, Barry, but I'm going to do that next week. That's very interesting. I've not gone the other way. No, but I'm going to try and do that. Very, very interesting. The kids, I mean, you know, they certainly create movement. I do ask for movement, but generally I have used a prompt. This is really a good one. Generally, there is a prompt, whether it's music or so. I'm going to do that. Thanks, Barry.
I love it when that happens.
Well, you know, I say in the webinar that and I believe it with all my heart. My greatest inspiration is my students. I learn from them. I learn new movement. I learn new ways of writing poetry. I learn new ways of drawing. I learn new ways of accessibility. And I most certainly learn from webinar participants and from my colleagues. So I love those moments as well. I live for those moments.
Absolutely. All right, well, it looks like we have reached the end of our question and answer session. So I hope that you all can just bear with us for a couple more minutes. I would like to ask you, our webinar participants, to remain on the webinar just for a few more moments to complete a short evaluation survey that will open when you close this window. Your feedback is always appreciated both by us as the Kennedy Center and by our lovely panelists or presenters, Jenny and Noel. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions or comments about the webinar as a whole, please feel free to contact me either by email or by phone, and I hope that you have a great day.